Welcome to Artkyk. This is Urvaja.
And this is Yamini. We love to talk about art.
So do join us as we share our insights of this world with you. Hi, Yamini. So here we are back for our another chat on art world market.
Yes, Urvaja, it's always a pleasure to talk about the art market because like we began or like we pointed on the previous session, we spoke about the primary market and that itself turned out to be quite a complex place. And now I think we should look at the other aspect of the market, which is of course the secondary market.
Anybody who's listening, would you quickly tell us what are the key things or what are the key players in a secondary market and why it's called so?
Okay, so as the word implies that it's second-hand, and over here, it means that the artist, a quick recap, when the artist sells it to a gallery or an artist sells it to a buyer directly, that becomes your first or your primary market. For those of you who are joining in this conversation for the first time, there's a link provided for you to go back to and listen into the primary market. But taking off from that, the secondary market is essentially once the artwork has been with a collector or in somebody's home, and now it's come back for sale. The reasons for selling are many. You know, in the art world, there's a common, the triple D, which talks about a work coming up for sale, which is either divorce, debt, or death. These are the three primary factors why a work would come up for a sale once it's been in somebody's home. And there are largely two segments to it. One is that you can go private channel or through an art dealer, somebody that you know who works within the space of art, and he can help you sell the work. So it can either go to, again, other individuals who are collectors or through a gallery and, sell it through that model. But the other more public and exciting space is the world of the auction houses. I mean, you're familiar with some of the auction houses. You want to just kind of, give a quick view on who are the key players in India and internationally?
Sure. So I think auction houses for a lot of people who are looking into art, for the first time, especially in India, I find that their introduction to the art market is through a news about an auction or how
Correct.
work fared in an auction, regardless of the fact that they know anything about the artwork or the artist or its provenance, before, because it's the excitement of that price hitting the headline, which makes people look up. So auctions, I think, where people have an introduction to art. I think a lot of the auction houses came into India or started robust business in India in the last 20 odd years. We had the economic liberation in the early 90s, and, over the course of the next 10 odd years, the digital space started sort of cropping up, and, there was the internet and this and that. So what happened is that by the time we, hit the 21st century, a lot of people were looking at online marketplaces. They also increased wealth. There was a notion of disposable wealth. There was a notion that you can buy something for its own sake, and that sort of drives its intrinsic value. And somewhere that all translated into how the art market started to get a new lease of life in this country. Albeit, as we've in the past, it's marginal when you look at the global numbers. But we were numbers before this talk, and we realized that the Indian auction market was estimated to be 13 to 15 crores at the start of the century, and in 20
That's right.
time it's close to 1,000 crores. So that's almost 1,000% increase, really.
Absolutely crazy. And if I can just give in a personal insight into it, early on in my career, I had an opportunity to work with an online auction house. And it's an interesting, when I look back at it today, it's interesting that the first Indian auction house, or to put it more correctly and politically correctly, say the auction house of India was online, which was Saffron Art. And we always had Christie's and Sotheby's coming in and doing the sales physically. but they were, as you know, Christie's is and Sotheby's both have their head offices in London, and they had the India sale, which used to happen in London and New York. And I remember in the mid 90s when collectors and gallerists would all make their annual trips for the auctions to see what is selling, who's buying, and that used to be the big thing.
Hmm.
But by the time it was 2000, we had a lot of them coming in and doing auctions in India, and I think that was a major turning point.
Yeah.
And you had Saffron at one end, which was purely online. They were way ahead of anything that was happening, and that was an interesting space. I know you briefly had, we toyed with, you had mentioned that you would also kind of compare the auction scene with other markets. You want to kind of add in something there, Urja?
No, no, absolutely. But you'd asked me also some of the key players. So in India, I think one of the most dominant players is Saffron Art, which has been at the forefront of everything that's happened in this country as far as auctions are concerned. Indigenous,
Mm-hmm.
be it the online space, be it branching off into different collectibles, sort of really setting the benchmark as to how auctions are conducted in India. They are
Mm-hmm.
based in Bombay, and Delhi, of course,
Right.
remains a key stronghold for them. Then there is, the old traditional auctions houses that have all become online. The Pandols, the Astaguru, I guess, is a fairly new one. There were lots of other small ones, Bid and Hammer, etc. I think they sort of have become smaller or disappeared over the course of the years.
I
Uh,
think disappeared.
yes. And of course, the two big international auction houses, both Christie's and Sotheby's, continue to hold their annual South Asian auctions in
Mm-hmm.
London and New York. Funnily enough, over the course of last 5 odd years, they have reduced their footprint in the country, but the overall South
That's right.
sales continue to grow from their global strongholds, not from India as much anymore. But again,
Mm-hmm.
also established a much larger online presence. So I guess somewhere those boundaries have reduced with respect to holding it on-site exhibition. I
So that's a good sense of the players, and I think it just shows that there's so many opportunities and options for people to look at, within the country itself. And of course, like you were saying, the transparency of it is kind of something that's appealing and gives a comfort factor, say that, okay, I know what the prices are and how that's going to pan out. And also the auction results are put out publicly. So that's a good thing in any mechanism of sale. Sorry, you were saying something. Did I cut you off with that, Urja?
No, no, that's all right. Because I think you started by asking a different question with respect.
Yes.
What was that?
So I had basically said that. So again, circling back, I said, would you compare or kind of do a comparable of what are the other Asian markets with specific reference to China, and how we could have something from that market and kind of compare it to what is
Oh,
happening in
yes,
India.
yes. So Chinese market is very interesting, especially as far as India is concerned. So just as a sort of little bit of a background, the international markets have always been Europe, UK, and the US, and they
Mm-hmm.
pretty much sort of accounted for 80 to 90% of any kind of art transactions that happen in the world. They're also the
Yeah.
works which are most valued, the highest values are Western arts, especially some of the impressionists, artists, etc., and increasingly more contemporary artworks as well. They are the art markets with the most amount of buyers and sellers, and of course, the biggest sort of auction revenues that come. The Chinese market really came into existence in the first part of the 21st century as far as art is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
Western art markets and even India to an extent, they didn't start with having a strong gallery base for secondary market, more as auction platforms. So some of the
Mm-hmm.
two top auction houses in China, which is Poly and Guardian,
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
for pretty much 80%, and I'll have to go back and check this number again, of all
Yeah.
art sales in China. It was only subsequently that galleries started becoming dominant. So it was a completely reverse cycle. It was the auctions that
mm,
were pushing the Chinese art in the public, and the galleries were established, or became prominent much later. Also, what's happened in the last 5 odd years is that even when I started looking at the art market, which is about 4 or 5 years ago, you'd see that Chinese art market was less than 20% of the global sales, which is still, phenomenal considering India doesn't feature at all. But
mm,
in the last 5 years, China has started to edge out UK as the second most dominant player. And it is really
mm,
on the back of the humongous Chinese auctions that happen. These are like
mm,
long auctions that, continue morning auction, afternoon auction, evening auction.
mm,
Over
mm.
Hong Kong remains a stronghold, as the Shanghai, as the key centers of Chinese art. And there is so much new Chinese art in the market, so many new Chinese artists, not just traditional artists, but also very many new artists. And
In fact, I was just going to ask you that when you say Chinese art, does it imply the antiquities and the medieval or also the contemporary?
all three. And I think
All three.
all three increasingly
Wow.
started to see more contemporary artists, that are being. I need to do a little more research. I mean, get some more facts and figures. Increasingly, I've started to see a lot of contemporary Chinese art. So when you're having
Mm,
the also what's happened in the last few years in the auction market worldwide is that earlier you'd have an impressionist sale, or you'll have an old master.
correct.
You'll define it by a period almost. But even in India, you'll have an antiquities sale, or you'd have the modern master sale, or you have a contemporary sale.
Correct.
It's increasingly, it's almost like, and Christie's and Sotheby's have both done it very successfully with the last few auctions they've had. They roll it all up, pieces from different periods in the same auction, and they're finding that people are they're getting better value from it. So
Interesting. Sorry. Before I lose that thought, I'm just going to interject here, Urvaja. You said that in now they're coming back to doing the antiquities and the modern and contemporary together. Do you know in the 90s when Christie's and Sotheby's used to have Indian art as an section for sale, it always started with something that was the antiquities. And the modern art section was something as a tail piece, there were a few pieces that were kind of interjected in it. And it
because
was
there
not
wasn't a
Indian
big
art.
market for it then, yeah.
It wasn't, and it was the antiquities and the miniatures and the medieval that actually got the people in. And
Mm.
then there would be that odd Germany Roy that would be brought up for sale, or something else that comes up. Very rarely you had something which was purely as the modern or the Indian art section. In fact, even today, when you go to the websites, you have the sales quite clearly defined now, segregated as the Southeast Asian art. And then you have the new section, which is a modern and contemporary South Asian art that comes in. And in between, it was quite distinct. And now again, they're kind of collapsing. That's interesting that, like they say, everything goes in cycles. So the cycle is kind of again coming back to the older
So
model
what's
where it
happening is
began.
that the market base is becoming so much more diverse. So
Correct.
sort of more younger people buying in, their tastes are not
Mm,
defined. So, for example, internationally, a lot of younger people, I assume, would buy things which the parents didn't buy, and vice versa. So,
mm,
establish their own tastes and buying habits in art. In India, I think because we don't have such a strong buying history, by and large, people who are coming into buying
mm,
for the first time, would like to be able to have an array of things they could look at. They don't want to be defined by a particular period or style or taste because everything is open. But coming back to the discussion on China,
correct.
why we thought we should bring it up is because China's trajectory into how the art scene has exploded is also mirrored by its growing wealth. It's mirrored by
Correct.
the fact that there's a growing sort of interest and pride in China as a developed country.
Mm,
And I think that's the trajectory that India would follow as well, with respect to growing wealth, sort of growing recognition of Indian arts for just art's sake, not just always
mm,
looking at, the Western art as a benchmark of. anything that
Mm.
noting. So
True.
I think both the secondary market, which includes the dealers, the galleries, and the auction houses, will play a big part in how that gets uh, consumed in the near future. And of course, not
Mm.
side, but almost as a main point in here, the online market space and how that develops would be the key driving force, especially for the new
True.
buyers.
True. And also just to kind of, add this thought, I think we can, before we kind of close in, is that the primary market, I mean, I'm drawing a comparison here. The primary market is all about what the artist is doing now, the living artist and the current trends and how their work will kind of evolve. And it's more about a person, a person who wants to get into artistry, how involved they want to be in the whole process. Not to say that you can't be involved when you're looking at options or artworks over there, but the slight difference is that it's more of what is the artist thinking, doing. That information is more easily accessible. It's dynamic and it's exciting space. The secondary market has its own high points and own points of interest. Is more in terms of you're looking back at it. It's an historical, moment almost. For
Mm,
instance, if you have an early work of Raza from the 60s that comes up in sale, then the talk is about, oh, how did he evolve and what does it mean to his later works. So it's a historical kind of a process. And also, I mean, the last point before I can kind of go, give it back to you, is that it shows the maturity of the artist and the market. It
mm,
shows that somebody had acquired the work, and whatever the reason they might have now chosen to put it back into the market, it means that there is an audience for it. It means, purely from a market perspective,
yeah.
it's a commodity that has been tried and tested, to put it in a
Not
very,
a commodity,
you know,
it's an asset, Yamini. It's
sorry.
yeah, it's like people invest in, gold
Correct.
or real estate or, what have you.
Exactly.
A strong
So it's,
secondary market, as you rightly pointed out, shows
yes,
value of an asset.
yeah, yeah. And that artist is somebody who has stood the test of time.
Yeah.
And hence, just to kind of give in a brief about that's why the values also kind of come out from there.
Mm,
It's not an artist deciding the value, but
mm,
it's the demand and the appetite of the market for that particular work, which drives the value of the artist's particular work. And the dynamics are very different in the secondary market as opposed to the primary market.
exactly.
I think this is what I just wanted to kind of, put out there, though in no way kind of gives a full picture. We will have another podcast where we talk about these things, but for now, in the context of the market, I think it's a good, thought to leave out to our listeners.
No, absolutely. It's a very good thought to leave out. And, thank you for the discussion on secondary market because the secondary market, as you rightly pointed out, is what makes an artwork an asset. And that's what drives the market. And that's why strong secondary markets are important because how else will the value of the asset continue to appreciate?
Correct, correct. So that's all from us for this particular podcast. Tune in for the next one where we'll talk about the mechanics of an auction house. How do you interpret the values that are put in there? Why is there a price range? And why does a lot remain unsold? All interesting thoughts.
All interesting thoughts. Looking forward to it. All right. Bye.
Yeah. Thanks, Urvaja. Bye.
Thanks, Yamini. You were listening to Artkyk, where we share personal views on subjects in the art world.
For more such content, please visit our website www.artkyk.com. That's ARTKYK. Keep listening.